Hello, new interns. We are back, and today we are going to be interviewing Will VanderZanden, but I want to make sure that I pronounced your last name correctly.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, good. So Will is a marketing strategy analyst intern, but everything else about him is going to come out through this interview. So that's all I'm going to say for now. And I want to ask before we get started, Will, how are you?
I'm great. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Cool, cool. Good to hear it. So we'll go ahead and get started with um, a few questions, and the first one's going to be about your school. So
Mhm.
I want to ask you, Will, what school do you currently go to? What's your major, and when are you expected to graduate?
Yeah, so I'm a senior this year at the University of San Diego, and I'm doing a double major with finance and business analytics.
Wow. Okay.
Staying
Uh,
busy.
yeah, no, for sure. And so since you're so busy, what do you enjoy doing kind of in your free time? What are your hobbies? Or do you have any time wasters, like TikTok or something
Yeah.
you like to do?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm down here in San Diego, so I love to go surfing. And I'm from Seattle originally, so I try to ski and whatnot when I get the chance.
Uh,
But my girlfriend totally got me on TikTok. Like I'm hooked. It's got a hold of me.
yeah, no, I know what you mean. TikTok's been a huge crutch for me as well. Um, so getting into kind of your role, can you tell us what your current intern title is, who you're working for, and then maybe can you give us some background on what that company or firm is?
Mhm. Yeah, so I am a strategic marketing analyst for California Bank and Trust. And California Bank and Trust is a part of Zion Bancorp. It's just the California division.
Okay,
And they focus mostly on commercial lending, so giving out loans to small businesses. And they're really involved in small community banking.
mhm.
Um, yeah.
Okay, cool. And in order to get this position, did you have to apply, or did you apply on a job site, or did you have a referral from a friend, or did they reach out to you?
Yeah, so it was through job sites. I have applied to basically every single listing I could find
Uh,
within my criteria on, Indeed, Handshake, LinkedIn, just any website I could find.
Got it. And what kind of was that criteria for you? What
Mhm.
were you kind of putting in the search bar? What other conditions did you have for the jobs you were looking for?
Yeah, so for me, I wanted to keep it as open as possible. I applied to any position that had analyst in the title, basically.
Yeah,
Primarily, I was looking for financial analyst positions, but I knew that if I got any analytical work, I'd be able to transfer it wherever I wanted to.
sure.
I also, I think it's great, people are applying to like, the Amazons, the Googles, the
Right.
big major firms. But for me, I was more focused on, really getting some hands-on experience and wherever that was, worked for me.
Yeah.
So I just really kept it open and applied everywhere just to kind of see where I'd hear back from.
I love that answer because we've been getting a lot of, not that there's anything wrong with it, but we've been getting a lot of interviews where people have referrals, which is awesome. But I love hearing the people,
Yeah.
we can relate to. Oh, you applied for it. Awesome. And you
Hmm.
got it. That's great.
Yeah.
Could you, you might not remember the exact number, but
Hmm.
roughly speaking, how many applications, like what time period was
Hmm.
this? And what was the volume of applications you sent out? 10, 50, 100?
Yeah, so when I said I applied to everything, I definitely meant that. Like I went through all these websites and I sat down for like an entire, Sunday and said, okay, I'm gonna apply for like 8 hours and just send out like literally as many resumes as I possibly can.
Uh,
Any listing that said analyst, I was sending it out to. And then, every few days I would check back at these websites and see if there are any new postings.
yeah,
So really, I mean, because the probability of hearing back is generally so low, especially when you're just
right.
randomly sending out a resume. So for me, it was just like I need to send out as many as I possibly can.
Would I be able to press you for an estimate figure, or is it just too blurry at this
It's,
point? I
I
don't know.
mean, like hundreds. Like yeah,
Okay,
it's in the
got
hundreds.
it.
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
worked for it, man. That's great.
Yeah.
And so, how long after submitting this specific
Mhm.
application that went through? How long after did before you received kind of contact
Mhm.
and then phone interview, something like that?
Yeah, so it was a while. I don't remember exactly, but if I were to guess, it had to have been at least like a month and a half, 2 months.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was good that I kind of started relatively early on the search, because I needed to line that up with summer. But it took them a while to reach back out. And I had applied for a financial analyst position, and they were like, hey, this is filled up. We have a marketing analyst position available as well. Would you be
Gotcha.
interested? And I was like, yeah, definitely. I'm just looking to do some analytics, and use my skills. And so from there, I was able to get a phone interview a few weeks after that. It did take a while.
And what was kind of the onboarding process from, let's say, the initial
Mhm.
phone interview? How many, were there a bunch of interviews, or
Mhm.
what was the process like?
Yeah, so it was funny because the first phone interview, they shot me an email. They're like, yeah, we just want to talk for like 5 minutes just to, get to know you, very basic. It was not that. It was like a 30-minute, like
Oh
full on character interview going through all of it. So
my God.
they definitely, caught me off guard with that one. So I kind of had to roll with the punches.
Yeah.
And then after that, I met with who would become my direct manager, as well as on the same call, it was, I guess it was the executive vice president of that branch.
Oh my gosh.
So like kind of the head honcho. So I got thrown this interview. I'm like, oh geez, like yeah,
My
really
goodness.
going straight into it.
And I know I'm pressing you for timelines, but it's really only if you can remember.
Mhm.
Basically, from the moment they reached back out, how long, weeks or months before they gave you the yes, you've got the position?
Trying to think. I think the whole process took me about a month, like between the phone interview to the second interview to then hearing back was about a month.
Okay. That's a
Hmm.
good, I feel like that's a good amount of time. Some
Yeah.
people I've heard there's been like 3 months in between, which is
Hmm.
insane.
Yeah.
And so coming into this position, I'm kind of curious, what experience did you have prior, and what do you think earned you the role? If you're considering
Hmm.
the perspective of the hiring manager.
Yeah, so I mean, I got lucky. I had a part-time internship experience prior to this,
Mm,
where I was working with Salesforce doing kind of some operational stuff, just
okay.
like a part-time project. I was working like 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
And I really didn't leverage that too much, which I think is a good thing.
Mm.
Because I mean, it's just kind of an unfortunate fact that you need internships to get internships. It's a terrible cycle. So I mainly leveraged the classwork that I had taken and like the technical skills that I had learned there, as well as just really asking them about the company and what they're looking for was really important, and to just show that I was really interested despite whatever was on my resume.
So would you say did your personality and kind of your communication play a large role in you getting this position, or was it mostly kind of what was on paper that they
Yeah, I
saw?
mean, the phone interview was more about, going through, my resume, talking about, okay, I'm involved in this student organization, I did this thing, just kind of briefly explaining that. But I think what really did it was when in the second interview, it was really about having a personality. I mean, I really tried as hard as I could to take it from an interview and turn it into a conversation,
Yeah.
because that just feels a lot more natural. And I think you can connect with or who's interviewing you a lot better that way.
uh,
So that was definitely played a pivotal role.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually something that we've been hearing. You start to pull certain things out of these interviews that are common in a good way, which is that personality actually, you have to get your foot in the
Hmm.
door, but they want to see that you're a real person, and
Hmm.
that you have a personality and that you can operate.
Definitely.
I'm glad you got it, Will, seriously.
Yeah,
And,
thanks.
so moving more into what you do,
Mhm.
would you say that your role is more of a support position or project oriented or kind of a mixture of both?
Yeah, so it was very project oriented. They were like, "Hey, we want to, learn some information about, how efficiently we're digital marketing."
Hmm.
And they just kind of asked me that and said, "Okay, what do you need?" Like,
Oh,
just kind of let me have it and let me figure it out with whatever tools or information or people I needed. So it was, very, very open-ended, very much so like, "Hey, here's what we want, like, take advantage of, whatever you'd like to do."
that seems okay. Hearing that seems pretty intimidating, actually.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was,
Okay, good.
yeah,
You were saying it like, oh yeah, and that was like
yeah.
easiest thing ever. Oh, okay,
Mhm.
wow. Um, so Great. You would characterize
Mhm,
it as a project-oriented position. Can
mhm,
you give us, before we go kind of diving into detail, can you give us
mhm.
an overview of what you do? So, for instance, if it
Yeah.
was like several projects, could you kind of give an overview of
Mhm.
each, or how
Yeah.
is it?
So I'll start with the main one I worked on. So they do a lot of digital marketing through their social media platforms,
Mhm.
specifically LinkedIn and like Twitter and Facebook. And they have a whole team devoted to content creation for all those platforms, as well as their website and blog posts and whatnot.
Okay.
So they wanted me to figure out what types of posts did the best, and what types of advertising worked well, and what were the differences between different platforms,
Mhm.
and also comparing California Bank to other banks similar to them, and cross compare how they're marketing relative to us to see if we can kind of learn some information.
Wow.
So to do that, I had to create a pretty huge database of every single post for our bank and other banks. It was a lot of scraping of information, and I collected, likes, comments, shares, all that, plus like the types of posts and the tones they conveyed, and what was the point of it.
Uh-huh.
And then from there, just did a bunch of data analysis, whether it was regressions or a lot of descriptive analytics to kind of pinpoint what was successful and why,
Mhm.
um, and then had to present that to the department and whatnot afterwards. So
Wow.
that was the main one that took up the majority of my time.
Uh-huh.
And then aside from that, I mean, I was in the marketing department, so to them I was the guy that knew Excel, knew their data structures.
Sure.
Like I was the guy for them. So
Uh-huh.
they had all these marketing assets, so pictures, pamphlets, and all that they have to like organize and send out to the company. So they had me create a database for those and kind of do an audit and figure out which ones are being used and why, and create kind of a system to keep that organized. So that, and a few other kind of small data based projects was what I was doing.
Wow. Okay. Those sound enormous, especially
Yeah.
the first one. Since I would actually like to know more about the one you just mentioned, and
Mhm,
before going to the major project, I've
mhm,
got a lot of questions. So I guess for kind of creating a database and
mhm,
then evaluating that database
mhm,
for the marketing assets, the pictures, the pamphlets, whatever
mhm.
else, um, how on earth would you go about starting that database? But fortunately, you're
Yeah.
saying this is an internal database, so it's all of
Yes.
their material.
Mhm.
How did you go about starting that and then evaluating it?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, if we're getting into the technicals here, what they had was they had a bunch of assets and a bunch of folders all over the place. And they
Mhm.
had like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 different spreadsheets that had been used before and were tracking this, that, and the other thing. So what I did is I threw all of those databases, those old ones that used to track the assets, and
Mhm.
I put them all into Microsoft Access. And from there, I used SQL to cross compare the product IDs on each of the databases to figure out, okay, like where is everything? What is common between all of these sheets and databases? Like what are they actually using?
Mhm.
And then from there, they had a list of every single time one of those assets was downloaded and used.
Okay.
And so then I aggregated that to figure out, for every product ID, what was the usage, and then
Mhm.
I'd cross compare that to the main database.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, mashing everything together using SQL queries primarily, and just a lot of picking through a big mess.
So then what you eventually found, they sorted themselves out in this
Mhm.
hierarchy of this is what's being used the most or looked
Yep.
at most frequently.
Yep.
And then you basically reported that back to the marketing team.
Exactly. Hmm.
Great. That
Yeah.
sounds okay. So it sounds like they were a marketing team who was
Yes.
tracking it the best they could, but
Hmm.
lost the handle on it because maybe a bunch
Yeah.
of people were working on it. Cool. You
Totally.
clean. I'm sure they're super happy that they hired. And also, just
Yeah.
now, you literally you said Microsoft Access and SQL. You just told me
Hmm.
two programs now that if I ever had a similar problem that I could use. So,
Hmm.
is that something? Are those programs? Did you learn that outside of school or during your classes? How'd you?
So I was introduced to all those during my classes. I had one class where I was fortunately able to get like an actual certification in Excel,
Okay.
and through that I was introduced to some basic SQL and some basic Access. But I really just took it and ran with it. I was like, okay, can I use these tools for other classes, unrelated things, or like, it's just kind of like keeping that in my back pocket and just kind of having that in my tool belt and trying to apply that to different problems in classes and whatnot to just kind of stay fresh and understand it better.
So you actually did something that's very rare amongst students, which is using the
Yes,
material.
exactly.
That's very impressive. And cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm,
And I want to definitely go into, the main project you said, the heft of your duties,
mhm.
which was the digital marketing. I'm oversimplifying it, but the
Yeah.
digital marketing database, all the social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook.
Mhm,
Did you go about, so if you can give me kind of the same rundown, what was the process for
mhm,
making that database and then
mhm,
evaluating it? And, if there's any, I love details and
mhm.
nuance. I
Yeah.
love.
So it was a lot. So I mean, because what I had to do was so for California Bank, for instance, they post on 4 platforms. There was LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, so for those 4 platforms, I pulled every single post going back a year. And for every post, I recorded the likes, comments, shares, and impressions, as well as like tone, age targeting, um, the general content, like just kind of what was the theme, what was the subject,
Yeah.
if it was promotional or not. Like I just recorded as many attributes as I possibly could. Um, so I did that for all the platforms for California Bank, as well as I think it was like 8 or 9 other banks.
Wow.
Um,
Going
so
back a year.
yeah, so it ended up being a database of like, I don't know, 4 or 5 thousand entries. It was miserable. Most of it I was able to do using some like HTML scrapers that I found online that were really janky but kind of worked.
For
But a lot of it,
briefly, what would be like in layman terms? What's an
yeah.
HTML scraper?
So I mean, because when you look at, if you pull up like the Instagram for California Bank, ideally you don't want to have to look at every single post and manually record it because that would take you forever.
Yeah.
So an HTML scraper just uses some code to scan the web page and then pull out the data that you want from it and put it into a spreadsheet.
And these scrapers are, you're saying, are at least the basic ones are
Mhm,
already existing and you can
mhm.
just source them. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean, you just poke around on GitHub, the internet, like you're gonna find someone that's done it before. And then I mean, I have no experience with HTML, but I just knew like enough about generally how programming works to kind of mess around with it to get it to work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
so I did that, and then after that, I had this giant database,
Mhm.
and I needed to create visualizations. So I planned out the exact type of analysis that I wanted to do, and that was primarily saying, okay, if this has a promotional content versus it doesn't, how does that affect likes, comments, and shares? So really picking at these individual variables and figuring out how much influence they have on how successful the post is.
Mhm.
Um, and then, ranking the different subjects and seeing like, oh, like financial advice, for instance, works great on Instagram, but it doesn't work well at all on Facebook. And so comparing between platforms and individual post variables and between banks even, I mean, I looked at Silicon Valley Bank, which really leveraged Twitter, because that's, their client base is like, these Silicon Valley guys are really big on Twitter. And so you have to, I learned about that and learned about how they marketed on Twitter specifically and, learned some insights there. But it was really, I mean, the work was really just taking this database, running a bunch of SQL queries and Access just to pull out the info to create graphs.
Yeah.
And then from there, just creating a slide deck of, I don't know, like about like 100 slides of just graphs sorted in different ways.
And that was there a final presentation for all those
Mhm.
slides, or did you? Oh my goodness, that must have
Yeah.
taken.
So, well, yeah. So I presented the big slide deck to the marketing department,
Mhm.
and it was like, I don't know, an hour and a half long meeting, just going through the whole thing. And then I created like a summary write up for them to take away. And then the department liked the presentation, so they had me present it to the executive suite.
Oh,
which was
wow.
terrifying.
Oh, I
But for that, I had to like really condense everything to get it in like a 30-minute presentation. Very different style because it's, a lot more Socratic. You have guys, kind of asking you, really like intense questions about, how you got your numbers and whatnot. But the presentation aspect was a big part of it for sure.
that is insanely impressive. Seriously, I do not hear that. I don't hear very many interns who are involved in that large of a role, pretty much. That's super impactful.
Yeah.
That's really cool. How would you kind of going back to the beginning part of
Mhm.
scraping data, how would you have something scanned for tone? Like, how do you set up parameters? So likes and stuff, that
Yeah.
makes sense, but, something like theme, how on earth would you
Right.
get around to code?
So that actually took a little bit of machine learning. Um, because I used a text detection algorithm
Mhm,
that would basically scan through the caption, and then certain keywords were associated with certain tones.
mhm.
So or even like punctuation, like if they had an exclamation mark, it was most likely a casual toned post. So things like that, or if it said like say like credit score, right? Like that's probably a more serious post talking about, like product offerings and whatnot. So kind of just I created a database of, words that are commonly associated with certain tones, and then it would cross compare the captions with those words.
Got it. And so if someone were to, be applying for this position,
Mhm.
what kind of knowledge would they need to have accomplished what you have? Is there another is there
Yeah.
another way, or did they need to would they need to know pretty much everything that you did? Coming
No, honestly, like I think that's the biggest misnomer with analytics is that you have to know all these techniques and understand all these things, but you really don't. Like it's really just like a problem solving mindset and looking at it and going, okay, what would be like the ideal way to go about doing this?
yeah,
And like, I mean, I don't know HTML, I don't know about text based algorithms, but like you just take the little technical skills that you have and you can kind of throw them together and leverage the internet and and do things
right
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got one last technical question, or at least I view it
Mhm.
that way, for you regarding that project. And that is kind of you were talking about once you have all this data put out, now you have to evaluate it. And you mentioned an example, which was like comparing promotional posts versus
Mhm.
ones that weren't promotional
Mhm.
and how it influenced or how that influenced success or how they
Mhm.
did. How would you and you mentioned I'm butchering this, like some sort
That's
of
all right.
regression models or
Yeah.
something like that. Is that sort of a standard like Excel practice
Mhm.
that you do or
Yeah,
what?
I mean, they I mean, honestly, they really told me nothing. They were just kind of like, well, like go figure it out. So, I mean, I didn't really have like a reference as to what I should be doing. So I was like, well, I mean, I know that I need to figure out how these variables, have an impact, whether, it's the tone or, this, that, the other thing, like how do I figure out, how much these things actually matter? And
Yeah.
so I would just do like create a scatter plot that would say, on the y-axis you have impressions and or views,
Mhm.
and on the x-axis it would say like it'd be, I don't know, what would be a good example. um
Well, certain theme, right? Or
yeah, a certain theme, but I guess if you want like a continuous variable, I was comparing like impressions to comments to see like how much, like comments and engagement had an impact on how the algorithm sends it out to viewers.
mhm.
And from there, I just created a scatter plot and then created a regression line, and then said, okay, here's your R squared value, which shows generally how much variance is explained by the amount of comments,
Mhm.
and just kind of leverage that to
Yeah.
say like how much each variable had an impact. Um, I mean,
And
if
so,
you're a statistician, you definitely say that's pretty basic, but for the
right.
job, that was really all I needed.
And so then what happens is that the conclusions, the graphs, you're saying the conclusions are pretty self-evident once you
Mhm.
fit it all onto. Okay.
Totally. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I know now that I'm definitely in the major I'm supposed to be in, which is marketing.
Yeah.
Thank you for solidifying that. But hey, that was a really well explained picture of what you do, and thanks for
Yeah.
explaining approaching it that way.
Definitely.
We're gonna go to the last third, but it's actually a
Mhm,
really short last third of the interview. And I want to ask you kind of your final thoughts. And
mhm,
so the first question would be, what would you say is the most valuable thing that you've learned in
mhm.
that internship, in this one?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was, I mean, they gave me a lot of autonomy. They just said, "Hey, like, have at it," you know?
Mm.
And I really just try my best to take full advantage of that. Because I mean, I was really only working on, a handful of projects at a time. And I mean, it was a full-time position. So I'm like, well, I'm sitting here for 8 hours. So I may as well, try to, use a lot of these skills I learned in class and like, use this as an opportunity to learn more things and really explore what I can do with my skill set and with my major.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, if you're in a position that has like any open-endedness or any leeway, like really take advantage of that. Like do something, beyond what you think you're capable of because you have the time to do it and you have the support to do it, with the people in your department. So really just to like take advantage of whatever they give you.
So I mean, having had the opportunity to really essentially solve things your way and test things
Mhm.
out, would you say your confidence in your own
Mhm.
ability has grown a lot?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it was kind of terrifying because, I spent all this time doing this big project and all this analysis. And I'm like, man, I don't know if like anyone's gonna think this is good until I present it.
Yeah.
I'd run it by, some people to get some thoughts, but like you never really know. But
Yeah.
after presenting that and like hearing the feedback that I got, it was like, whoa, like, I can really do this. Yeah.
So cool, man. And final question, Will, is do you have any quick advice or advice in general for people who are applying or who'd like to apply for similar internships?
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest question I asked was, what can I offer to the company, right? Like, I mean, because it's clear that what they're providing me with is, a job with experience that I can leverage to, you know, get through my career. So it's clear, what a company is offering me. And so, I made sure to ask them, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the project I'm going to be working on? And then after they told me that, saying, okay, based on my skill set, here's generally how I'd approach it. And then on top of that, I also asked, if you had any prior interns and what were their roadblocks, what were their big issues, so that, if I get this position, how can I, succeed and do
Yeah,
better than previous people in this role. So really, I mean, making yourself a commodity and saying like, I'm coming here to offer you something as well, went a long way for sure.
great. Yeah, so understanding your utility and being clear
Hmm.
about that is, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Hmm.
So we are going to wrap this interview up, but Will, it was a pleasure speaking with you about your role. We are
Definitely.
going to, for anyone watching, or there's probably going to be people reading this as well. You can definitely connect with Will on his LinkedIn, and if there are any other links that he is willing to share or would like to share, we'll include those as well. But for now, I want to wish for us it's 6:30 for anyone watching. So, Will, I'm going to wish you a great rest of your evening. Thanks for coming out and talking.
Awesome. Thank you. You as well.
Take care. Bye.